Well, good morning. Good morning, Mosaic. Hey. So if we've not met before, I'm Chuck Mingo, and I bring you greetings from Cincinnati, Ohio. This feels like a home away from home for me. I'm a pastor in Cincinnati, but love what God is doing at Mosaic, and so always excited to get to spend some time with you, and I'm glad to be with you in this series, Hold the Line. Now, I've got a thing up here. I've got a thing, and I'm wondering, first, I'll ask two questions. First of all, who knows what this is? Who knows exactly what this is? Yes. And I'm just looking at some of these young faces, and let me ask the other question. Who has no idea what this is, right? No idea. Well, this is a transistor radio, and I tried to explain. I've got three kids. They are 16, 14, and 11, and I tried to explain to my kids what a transistor radio was. That was a big mistake. That was a big mistake because, they're looking at it and they're like, wait a second, you would have thought I told them we used to make music by rubbing two sticks together. Like, they just were like, what? Dad, you actually had to, turn it manually, and who was the DJ? Was it Abraham Lincoln when you got to a they were just picking with me. They didn't get it. And I'm like, yes. Pre-Spotify, pre-Apple Music, we didn't have to, we couldn't go on YouTube and look up vibes for studying algebra. We didn't have that. We had this. And to be honest, and those of you who had one of these know, for the most part with a transistor radio, what we heard was static. You would hear static as you're trying to find the right station, and but every now and then, if you got it to the right spot, boom! Right? Yes, let's give it up for some Justin Bieber this morning. Amen. Yes. 21 tracks of newness, right? Yeah, so anyway, we would have to kind of lean into this, and every now and then you get it right. You get music. You get clarity. And here's what I want to say. I think our world needs that kind of clarity today. I actually think this transistor radio has something to teach us spiritually, because just like the radio needs to be connected to a tower, you and I, if we're going to hold the line, if we're going to live a life of faithfulness in a world that is increasingly hostile to our faith, you and I need to be connected to the source. If we're not connected to the source, you and I in the world wind up sounding more like a fuzzy echo than a faithful signal. And so I want to speak to you from the title today, Turn It Up, Living a Life of High Fidelity. And we're going to look at Daniel chapter 6. As we've been going through this series, we're looking at Daniel. And Daniel is a man who lived with clarity in a culture that had lost the signal. And I think in some ways, he has a lot to teach us. And we're going to explore today, what does it look like if we turn down the static, if we turn up the clarity, and if we allow our lives to be a signal for something greater. We can learn that from Daniel, because what the world needs today is not staticky, distorted images of Jesus. But what the world needs today is a highly fidelity reproduction of Jesus, and that comes from living a faithful life. So let's pray, and we're going to jump in. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for the gift of this moment that we have to focus our attention on you, to focus our attention on timeless truth, to focus our attention on who it is that you call us to be in the real worlds that we inhabit, in the schools that we inhabit, in the jobs that we inhabit, in the neighborhoods that we inhabit. God, you have something to say to us today. I pray that we would be attentive to your word, that we would tune in so that we can be more connected to the source today and hold the line of faith. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So Daniel lived a high fidelity life. The book of Daniel is really about a young man who stays faithful in a hostile culture. That's really what it's about. Daniel lived in a city called Babylon. And if you want to think about it this way, Babylon was the New York City plus the Los Angeles plus the Washington, D.C. of the moment that Daniel lived in. It was the seat of government. It was the seat of culture and entertainment. It was the seat of the economic engine of the kingdom of Babylon at the time. So Daniel was living in this environment not by choice. He was in exile. He had actually been forcefully removed from the nation of Israel to living in Babylon, in a culture that wasn't just opposed, but was absolutely hostile to the God of Israel. And yet it was exactly there that God had planted Daniel. And I want to just say that to you today. I don't know where you find yourself, but I know this. God has you where he wants you. In the job that you have, in the neighborhood that you live in, I believe we are all called to bloom where we're planted. Doesn't mean you're going to be there forever. And some of us are like, I don't want to hear that because I want to leave. But all I'm saying is in the moment that you're there, just know God has you exactly where he wants you to be. He did that with Daniel. And in fact, Daniel in chapter 6, as we're going to look at today, his influence is rising in Babylon. In a hostile culture to his faith, his influence is rising. But of course, as his influence is rising, so are the haters in his life. And so we're going to pick up the story today in Daniel chapter 6, where at verse 1 it says, Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces. And he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and to protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire kingdom. Again, high influence. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded our only chance of finding grounds for accusing him will be in connection with the rules of his religion. So I want you to just reflect on this, that Daniel was in a low-fidelity environment where people didn't have a problem conniving, backstabbing, doing things to bring and pull others down. They were actively trying to undermine Daniel's leadership, undermine his influence. And yet, Daniel was a high-fidelity guy. I want to just focus on these words for a moment. It says Daniel was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. This is an aside. This is for free. One of the most God-honoring things that you and I can do is be good at our jobs. Actually do the job you have really well. If you are the one that's always showing up late, if you are the one that's gossiping in the break room, and if you are the one who is always dipping out early with a bless your heart as you walk out the door, let me tell you, you're going to be a staticky representation of Jesus. And here's the thing, it's important that you do your job well because you might be the only Jesus your coworkers see. You might be the only Jesus that your classmates see. You might be the only Jesus that your neighbors see. And so, like this transistor radio, we need to be a clear signal. Now, when it comes to transistor radios, there's a reason when you have static. Whenever you experience static in a transistor radio environment, it comes down to a couple reasons. And those couple reasons, I think, have rich spiritual parallels for you and for me. One of the reasons that you may not get a signal on a radio is because the signal is weak because it's too far removed from the source. If you're too far removed from the tower, you don't get any signals. I'm really going to date myself here, but maybe there's 1 or 2 people in here who remember when you used to take road trips before Spotify, before you could stream information. And like, if you were in Maryland, you were good, like, because you were near Baltimore, and Baltimore has a lot of radio stations. But, you know, if you started driving, and I'm not going to name states, I'm not going to judge them, I'm not going to judge states in here today, but you would get to certain states, and all you would get is static, right? No radio signal to be found, because you were too far from the source. In the same way for you and for me spiritually, if we are not prioritizing relationship with Jesus, if we're not in our Bible, if we're not praying, if we're not in community, our signal, our clarity is going to be weak because we are too far removed from the source. That's why Jesus says in John 15:5, apart from me, you can do nothing. So one of the reasons we might have static in our lives is because we're too far from the source. Another reason for static in a transistor radio environment is interference. There's competing signals, and there's lots of other things coming, and so you can't really tune in and hear your signal. And for us, spiritually speaking, the cultural pressures that we live in can oftentimes be so distorting, just the distractions. There's competing values, and then there's also our own sin that can interfere with our ability to hear God clearly. That's why in Romans 12:2 it says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. If we do what the world, and what I mean by the world and what the Bible means by the world, is the way of living that is opposite the way of God. And so if we are immersed in that more than we're immersed in the culture of the kingdom, the culture of God, we're going to have interference. So that's another source of static. The other source of static, though, is internal corruption. you can have a bad tower. Something can be wrong in the inner workings of the wiring of the transistor radio. And if that's the case, you're not going to have a clear signal. In the same way in our lives, bitterness, unforgiveness, unrepentant sin, these are things, unresolved wounds, these are things that can cause us to have a distorted signal. A prayer that I regularly pray because I know I got stuff in me is Psalm 139, 23 and 24, which says, "Search me, O God, point out anything in me that offends." So you and I were made to be a clear signal of the voice of God, but when we are distorted, when we're distracted, or when we let sin cloud the inner circuits of our lives, we actually lose the ability to be the signal. So I want you to just do a quick check-in right now. I just want you to ask yourself, just in your own mind, you can pray if you want to in this moment, which one of these things is fuzzing up your signal? Which one of these things? Is it distance from the source? Is it the distraction that comes from the culture and the competing pressures of the world? Or is it just some internal junk that you know, man, I got to get this right with God, and because I haven't, this is affecting the way that I am representing God in this world? Because Daniel was able to cut all of this static. He was able to live a life where he was a powerful signal for God. And I believe that you and I can too, because Daniel teaches us 3 ways to do it. And the first is this: Daniel was tuned in. Daniel knew how to tune in. He was connected to the source. Let's go back to the text. And in Daniel 6:5, we read, it says, "So they concluded our only chance of finding grounds of accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion." What a backhanded compliment, right? This guy is so consistent. He is so aligned to his faith, but we still want to take him out. So what we need to do is figure out a way to take him out that has something to do with his consistency. Here's my question to you. If your neighbor, if your coworker was in a crisis, would they come to you for prayer? Would they know, you know what, I don't know that I believe everything that Joe or Susan believes, but I know that they follow Jesus, and if I need something spiritually, I'm going to come to them. Would your neighbors come to you? Would your coworkers come to you? And if they did come to you, would you know what to do? Well, you can if you're connected to the source. God wants you to be the person people look to and come to when they need a spiritual impact. And he wants you to be equipped to be able to respond in that moment. Daniel was able to do that because you are what you consistently do. You are what you consistently do. And so Daniel was consistent. He didn't just start praying when life gets hard. We're going to read that life's going to get hard for Daniel, like real hard for Daniel. But Daniel didn't start praying when life gets hard. I love what it says in the text. It says it was as usual, 3 times a day, as he had done before. Daniel was consistent. Who are you consistently? What does your consistent spiritual life look like? What do you think is the consistent signal that you send? See, because challenges, when they come, challenges may change you, but what challenges do more than change you is they reveal who you already are. Give you an example that I lived through. I used to work at Procter & Gamble, so I was in a business setting, and there was a leader. He was a high-level leader, and his name was Tim. And Tim was a consistent guy. He was a consistent follower of Jesus in an environment that was secular, and so I admired Tim so much because he wasn't afraid to talk about his faith. He was loving. He was also an amazing performer, so like people respected him on the work front. It was like he was like who I wanted to be as I would grow up in that career. And Tim got a diagnosis of cancer that ultimately wound up taking his life. And I remember watching Tim walk through that cancer diagnosis in the context of P&G, in the context of people, not all of whom are Christian, in the context of people who had differing and varying spiritual views. And I tell you what I thought about and still think about today, because I've still been impacted by Tim all these years later, is that he was consistent. And that cancer challenge did not change Tim. It just revealed who he was in God. And when we were at Tim's memorial, I got to watch people who said, I don't know the God who Tim knows, but I saw that God in Tim. And I'm telling you, that's what you're called to be. You're called to be a person who is so tuned into the source that can actually be transformed ahead of your trial, so that when you experience the challenges that life is going to bring to all of us, your consistency shows up and people see it. and it impacts the way they think about you and the way they think about God. So I want to go back to this verse we used a little bit earlier, but I want to dig into it because I think it's an emphasis on this point. Romans 12:2 says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. I want to suggest to you that you have a choice. Will you conform or will you be transformed? And that every day you and I are making choices that are either moving us toward conforming to the patterns of the world or being transformed by allowing God to change our mind. And here's the good news I love about this text is it doesn't say the work of transformation is on you, buddy. The work of transformation is on you, sis. You got to figure it out. No, let God transform you. The good news is if we will put ourselves in a posture as usual, as was his practice, God will do the work of transformation in us. When we are tuned into the source, we will be transformed. And that transformation will show up and allow us to hold the line in the world. Second thing that Daniel did is he cut the static. Daniel cut the static, and he did it. He dared not to conform even in the face of lions. Yes, this is the chapter, if you have ever been in Sunday school or ever been in a kid's ministry or, you just kind of have a cursory view of the Bible. This is where we see that story of Daniel and the lion's den. Daniel and the lion's den. So I want to dig into that. It's really interesting. So I have a son, like I said, I have three kids, but 2 boys, and my younger son just turned 14. His name is Samuel. And Samuel he's a gifted kid. Like, things come easy to him. He's super athletic. He's incredibly bright. And things just come easy to him. And so because of that, Dad thinks, as a 14-year-old, Samuel needs a little bit of work on his work ethic. That's what Dad thinks. And so I was thinking about his birthday, and I write my kids a letter on their birthday, and I was thinking about what do I say to Sam, and how do I frame this in a way that doesn't sound condemning, because I'm not condemning him. I love the things that are gifts in him, but I want to encourage him. And so what I themed the letter this year for Samuel was, I said, Samuel, I want you to do hard things this year. I want you to find things that are challenging and fun, and I want you to stretch yourself this year. I want you to do hard things, because I think there's some character that gets developed, not when things are always easy, but there's something that gets only developed when you have to overcome. And I want that for my son because I want him to have that character. And I think about Daniel in this story and Daniel's consistency in the book of Daniel. Daniel did hard things. You guys have probably walked through when Daniel decided not to eat the same diet that everyone else was eating. That was a hard thing. He did a fast, and that proved to be fruitful. Daniel and his friends were consistently willing to do hard things. And I want you to recognize that Daniel was willing to do that in the face of opposition. What those conniving, backstabbing other leaders did was basically get King Darius to declare a law that you could only worship King Darius. And that any other worship to any other god would be considered a crime punishable by death. And King Darius, because he was arrogant and didn't realize he was being deceived, signed that into law. And one of the things that was true about the Assyrians and the Medes and the Persians, once the king signed it into law, even the king couldn't reverse his own law. And so he's hooked. He does this. And that's when we see Daniel still continuing to pray to God. Daniel was willing to defy the law of the land. So let me just ask you, how do you reconcile a person who follows God defying the law of the land? When in other places in the Bible, like Romans 13, we see words that say we're to honor the authorities that we're under. How do you reconcile those things? I want you to lean into that tension because I think that's part of what we have to understand if we're going to hold the line of faith and be consistent to God's will over man's will. One example of this, and I think one of the best pieces of writing on this, is actually one that I got to experience the place where it was written just a couple weeks ago. I went to Birmingham, Alabama as part of a trip, a civil rights journey, and we at Birmingham has a Civil Rights Institute, and they actually have the jail that Martin Luther King Jr. was in when he wrote the famous letter from a Birmingham jail, which was a response to pastors who were saying to him, you're doing these protests against segregation. We think you should honor the law of the land and just let things play out. And part of King's response to those pastors was this. He says, one may well ask, How can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer is found in the fact that there are two types of laws. There are just laws and there are unjust laws. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregated a false sense of inferiority. So I love how King is saying there are two kinds of laws here. And as followers of Jesus, we are actually obligated to stand against unjust laws. Now, lest you think that was just his philosophizing in jail, let me give you some biblical examples of where we see the same thing. The disciples, after Jesus left, were strictly prohibited from proclaiming the name of Jesus, said, do not preach in this name. And yet in Acts 5:29, they say, we must obey God rather than man. And they continue to preach the gospel. I'll give you another example. Corrie ten Boom, the hiding place, was willing to break the unjust laws in Germany and hide and house Jews who otherwise would have been subject to the Holocaust. Because to not do that would be to break the higher law, the law of justice, the law that honors the dignity of people. And the reason I say this is because when you read these things in the Bible, I think it's helpful for us to pause and reflect. How does that play out in our lives? Listen, we may or may not be called to disobey the laws of this land because of honoring a higher law of God. We may, but we may not. But I want to submit to you that there are situations you will face where you're going to have to choose to obey the higher law. Let me give you a couple examples. Refusing to compromise integrity in your job when pressured to bend the truth or cut corners to succeed. You're going to have that experience. Some of you may be having that experience right now, and you're going to have to choose. Am I going to cut the static and hold the line of integrity, or am I going to bend my morals to align with what's going to advance me in my company? Here's another one, speaking up for the overlooked. When the company culture or your peers marginalize or exclude others, you might be in a situation where what people are saying, what people are doing is diminishing the image of God that is true in all people, and you're going to have to decide. Am I going to go along with that? Am I going to be silent? Or am I going to be willing to maybe step outside of the norm and say, wait, I don't think this is right? Here's another one. Living out faith openly when expressing your beliefs is frowned upon or misunderstood. Now, I'm not talking about proselytizing for proselytizing's sake, but there may be times when you have to be faith forward, where you have to say, hey, this is what I believe. I want to pray for you, whatever that may be. And we're going to have to ask the question, am I going to be more concerned about my reputation in this moment? Or am I going to follow that prompting of the Spirit that's telling me to share my faith? One more for you to think about, challenging unjust policies when your role asks you to carry out what you know is wrong. Some of us, we operate in authority. We have a level of power. We manage teams. We manage organizations. We might run an organization. We might be the founder or the builder of something. And there are some times we're going to have to make a decision that goes against maybe what seems pragmatic because we know that it doesn't align with our spiritual value. In these moments, it's going to be critical that we are able to hold the line. And the way that we're going to be able to hold the line is if we cut the static, even when it's hard. That's what Daniel was able to do. And here's why those moments are so important. Because in those moments, they set us up to do the third and I think the most profound thing that Daniel models for us, and that is we get to be the signal. You and I get to be the signal that other people can look to see what God is like. Because Daniel was consistent in his words and his actions, because Daniel was tuned in, because Daniel was willing to cut the static and do the hard thing, he actually got the opportunity to point the way to the true king and to his kingdom. Another story I'll share with you is when I worked at P&G, when I was in corporate, had a friend named Ivan. And Ivan was not a follower of Jesus. We built a relationship, we got to know each other, and through that friendship, I got to talk to Ivan about my faith, just in an authentic way. I wasn't like, I didn't enter the relationship saying, I'm going to convert this guy. It wasn't that. But just through the time that we had, he started asking questions. And those questions led to more questions. And those questions led to, hey, man, would you be willing to kind of like get in the Bible with me and maybe learn some of this stuff together? And as Ivan was saying yes to all of that, it was just amazing to see what happened. Ultimately, one of the coolest moments of my life was at P&G. I was attending Crossroads where I'm still a pastor, but I wasn't a pastor at this point, but I got to baptize Ivan. I got to baptize him. He came to faith in Jesus, and I got to be a part of that moment with him. And I will never forget that moment. It was so powerful. In fact, thinking about baptism is this amazing declaration, this public declaration that says, I am aligning myself. I am aligning myself with God. I'm choosing to be a signal for God. And so when Ivan went under the water, it was kind of symbolic of him dying to an old way, an old life. And as he came up out of the water, it was symbolic of him actually getting this new life that Jesus promises us. And that's why baptism is such a powerful moment. And I know at Mosaic, baptism is a big deal. And you all celebrate baptism. And maybe you're here today and you're like, I'm not taking that step, but I want to. I'm ready to step into that. There's a card, and it's right behind your seat. And I would just encourage you, or right in front of your seat, I would encourage you, man, just check that box. If you feel like you're ready to take that step of baptism, and someone from this church would love to and will follow up with you this week, it's a powerful moment. But I share that story with Ivan because I want you guys to know I was not a pastor when I led Ivan into a relationship with Jesus. I was a coworker. And I want you to know you don't have to be a paid professional Christian to bring people into relationship with Jesus. You don't have to have a microphone and an E6 and a screen. You don't have to have that to lead people into relationship with Jesus. In fact, I will say this. You guys have something I no longer have, which is you get to be among people who are far from God much more easier than I do. You want to see a party go downward? People ask me what I do for a living, and the party goes down, down, doobie, down, down, right? They start looking at the drink in their hand, and should they hide it even though I already saw it? I mean, it just changes the conversation. But friends, you are on the front line of the Great Commission. Jesus called us to go and to make disciples of all people, and you get to do that because you coach their kids, and you are in the break room with them, and you live in the neighborhood with them, and you're hanging out at vacation with them. And I want you to know that your life is meant to be a signal. You don't have to be a pastor. You get to pastor from the life you live. So I want to encourage you to be the signal. That's exactly what Daniel did. He was willing to be the signal. And let's look at what happens next. In Daniel 6:16, it says, the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. I just want to pause and recognize that this king was wowed by Daniel's faithfulness. Do you see that? He was wowed by this guy who would rather worship his God and face the lions than choose to do the safe thing that could spare or save his own hide. And I want you to know the den was real. The den was real. Archaeologists have uncovered lion reliefs in what was ancient Babylon. We know historically that kings would keep lions as a sign and symbol of their power. And basically the symbol was, do what I say or face the lions. So we know this is a real situation. This isn't just a bedtime story. We have this image, and I just want you to think about this image because the lion's den wasn't just symbolic. It was brutal, and it was real, and it was meant to terrify. And so Daniel faced not just death, but a death designed to literally break the body and the will. But he was able to have a calm trust in God. And it wasn't naive. It was rooted in something. And so what happens next? Well, the king doesn't sleep that night. But at first light of dawn, it says in Daniel 6:19, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the lion's den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. I wonder, what did this ordeal look like from Daniel's perspective? What was that night in the den like from Daniel's perspective? You ever thought, what if Daniel lived in our moment and was able to live stream that experience? It might look a little something like this.
Hey everyone, Daniel here. So, the king signed a law banning prayer for 30 days. Obviously, I prayed. Let's see how that goes.
All right, guys, it's official. They're throwing me into the lion's den. I'll film what I can, Dre, and if I survive, this is gonna blow up.
All right, welcome to my crib. That one's asleep. That one's just staring at me. Honestly, they're kind of chill, but I'm whispering because I really don't want to wake the angry one.
Morning, folks. Still here, and they are too. That one's been staring at me since sunset. Starting to think they like me.
All right, made it out. Thank God, literally. If you watch till the end, comment what you think, and hey, maybe I come back if y'all want part 2.
I just want to say, there are good uses to AI, and that's one of them. So I'm just saying, just going on record. But the reason I show that is because I want you to just think about Daniel in that lion's den. And here's the shift that I want you to see. Before Daniel went into the lion's den, the king was wowed by Daniel's faithfulness. But listen to what happens on the other side. In Daniel 6:26, the king then says, I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lion's den. I want you to notice the shift. Before the lion's den, the king was wowed by Daniel's faithfulness. But after the lion's den, the king was wowed by the faithfulness of Daniel's God. You got to see that switch, because what God wants to do through your life is, if you're willing to hold the line when it's hard, people will stop just being wowed by your faithfulness, and they will be wowed by the faithfulness of the God you serve. And we're called to be people who do that. Daniel's confidence, his ability to be faithful, was rooted in the truth that I want you to know about your life. And it's this: God's fidelity is greater than your fidelity. God is more faithful to us. Daniel didn't do this on his own power, and he didn't have to, because we serve a God who will never leave us or forsake us. We serve a God who always comes through. We serve a God who never fails. And if we are wowed and convinced of God's faithfulness, you and I can hold the line. You and I can be a signal. So I want to encourage you to turn it up. To turn up the signal of God, to be the neighbor that others look at and say, man, there's just something about that neighbor. They just exude love. I want you to turn it up in your job or in your school, and be the person that people look at and say, man, they're just committed. They do their job well. I want you to turn it up and be that way, because Daniel actually begins to foreshadow something that we see later in the Bible. See, later in the Bible, another person was going to go into a den of lions. Another person was going to face the breaking of the body and the death that would come from it. In fact, the lions were death, hell, sin, and the grave. In many ways, what we see is the lion's den with Daniel foreshadowing the death and ultimate resurrection of Jesus. And what I want you to know is the same God who delivered Daniel, the same God who was more faithful than Daniel was, is the same God through his son Jesus that was able to close the mouth of the lion of death. He was able to close the mouth of the lion of hell. He was able to close the mouth of the lion of sin. He was able to close the mouth of the lion of everything that separates you and me from God. And on the third day, rise with all power, so that all of the universe would know that there is a God who is faithful. He is faithful. And so our confidence is rooted in the God who is faithful. So I want to give you just a couple things. How do you apply this on Monday? I'll give you 3 Monday moves to think about in your own life. How do you apply this? First, man, maybe for you, it's time to tune in by starting your day on God's frequency. So I'm going to give you a simple challenge. Before you do anything else in the morning, before you pick up your phone, before you turn on anything else, tune into God. It might be moments of silence that you start your day with. Whatever it is, just allow yourself the gift of the clarity of making God the first thing you tune into every day. Maybe for you, it's cutting the static. Remember earlier I had you think about what's the thing that's getting in the way? Maybe this is the week where you're going to identify and reduce one source of noise in your life. Maybe there's something you need to cut back on. Maybe you need to limit screen time. Maybe you need to cut back on toxic media. Maybe you need to take a walk without earbuds, not always having something in your ear. Whatever it is, this week, find a way to cut the static. Third thing, be the signal. There's somebody who needs the Jesus that you have. And maybe this is a week where you just take a bold step. Maybe the bold step is just to stop and listen and not have a surface conversation with someone at work, but ask the deeper question. Maybe it looks like there's somebody who you know is going through something and you've been like, should I ask them if I can pray for them? And maybe this is the week you say, hey, listen, you can turn this down. I won't be offended. I do this all the time with people. It's like, hey, you can turn this down. You won't be offended. And I don't have to do it right in front of you. I can do it later. But you told me something that's really important going on in your life. Hey, I'd love to pray about that. And if you want me to pray now, I can, or I can just pray later. It's an easy way to do that. But maybe this is the week that you do that because you and I are called to be the signal. We're called to be people who God can use to hold the line in this world so that others can know and see who he is. You know, I think about Jesus. What Jesus did is he was so faithful to us that he was willing to literally offer his body for us. So faithful to us that he was literally willing to give us the blood, shed his blood for us. And every time we take communion, we remember that. And so as we close, I want to give us an opportunity to remember the fidelity that Jesus has showed us. If you look in the pocket in front of your seat, or if you're on the first row, you got a cup there with some elements of communion. And I want you to just go ahead and take off that thin top layer and hold that wafer in your hand. When Jesus was about to go to the cross, he said something to his followers that night over a meal. He said, "This is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Jesus was willing to break his body for us. And, you know, maybe you're here and you're not sure yet about Jesus. You're not sure if you follow him yet. You don't know that you would necessarily say, hey, I'm all in. This is something that is special and reserved for people who say, I'm all in on Jesus. And so maybe for you, this is a moment to consider. It's just a moment to reflect. Maybe to refrain from taking this, but also just realize you're invited to this table. And when you're ready to say yes, this table is for you. I'm going to ask you to do something with this wafer, and that's just break it. Just break it in your hands. Because what Jesus offered us was a broken body for our salvation. Let's take and eat together. And then go ahead and peel off the foil, the juice. You know, in the time that Jesus lived, what they believed, and it's true, is that life is in the blood. And so by Jesus shedding his blood, what that meant was he was willing to give life to us through the life that he had. And so every time we take this, it's a toast in some ways, a toast of gratitude for the life that Jesus was willing to offer us through his shed blood. So let's drink and toast in appreciation together. You know, Jesus was willing to give his life for ours, and in the same way calls us to give our lives to the world. And that's what this series is all about. So I want to leave you with words of blessing that come from a 14th century nun who lived a high fidelity life, St. Teresa of Avila. And I want you to just think about these words with me. This is what she said. She said, "Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes through which he looks compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands through which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands. Yours are the feet. Yours are the eyes. You are his body. Christ has no body now on earth but yours." And I want to just encourage you in this moment just to put your hands in front of you. You can take a look at them. The hands that you are looking at, if you are in connection with Jesus, are literally the hands of Jesus. So may you go this week and be the hands of Jesus in the spaces where you occupy. As you walk out of here, may you remember that yours are the feet of Jesus, and that where you go, he goes. The love you share is his love. The kindness you offer is his kindness. So may you go, and may this world be better because of you. God bless you guys. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.